afternoon, everyone. My name's Nicole Aliev, and I'm with Caris Realty. And joining me today is Vicki French from Salisbury, McLister and Foley. Vicki is the Director of Marketing, and she's also a licensed title agent. And today's discussion is all about closings and the role of a title company and some of the things that can go wrong, some of the things you should expect when you're closing on a property, and just some information which I hope will be helpful about title companies and the role that they play in a closing. So that said, Vicki, hi, welcome. Tell
Hello.
us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Vicki French, and I am a licensed title agent and director of marketing with Salisbury, McLister and Foley. I also do help facilitate short sales for those that are in distressed property situations. I've been a licensed title agent for 10 years and basically in real estate and settlements most of my adult life.
Wow. Well, thank you, Vicki. Vicki, I'm going to jump right in and ask you, what is a closing?
A closing is a transaction, a legal transaction that occurs between two mutually agreed parties, a buyer and a seller typically, and we have agents like yourself to help facilitate that legal transaction. At a settlement or closing, you would have a licensed company help conduct that transfer to ensure that all of your documentation is completed correctly in compliance with regulations and record it in that same. Our law firm, located downtown Frederick, is right around the corner from the courthouse, and so we literally, once the settlement has complete the closing requirements if there's a lender, and if not, if it's just cash transaction, conduct all of the final financial transfers that are required and take the documents to the courthouse for recording if they are in Frederick County, of course.
Super. And tell me, how do you, as a title company, prepare for closing? What are the things that you're needing from the buyer, from the seller, and who in the title company will kind of typically work on closing a particular transaction?
Okay, a typical transaction at our firm begins with the receipt of a request for title from a lender, if it's a refi, and if it's a purchase, oftentimes the realtor of the buyer will forward us the transaction. In the state of Maryland, it's the buyer's choice as to whom they would like their settlement to be conducted by. We, of course, request the law firm to receive the transaction being a ratified contract. So we receive a ratified contract and forward that for processing. We'll open the file. We'll send out some hello letters letting buyer, seller, agents know when and where your transaction will be. We will order title. Title is the abstract, the history of the property, which would reflect any defects. We also request that homeowner documents be sent if there's an HOA or a condo, and we gather the information required for settlement. If there's a loan officer involved, we obtain their information as well and schedule a date and do what I call magic, so that if there are any defects, perhaps unrecorded releases, which are pretty standard in our industry. A lot of times there might be something that wasn't recorded properly, or in the industry, we just make that magic happen and we come to the settlement table. And the expectations of the buyer and seller, I believe, would be to have just the awareness of when things are happening, where to be, and how much we need to have transferred. There are documents such as the settlement statement, which we also refer to as an ALTA, and those documents are provided to everybody prior to closing so that they can review them, make sure that all of their numbers are correct, buyer and seller, and work with the lender, again, if there is one, and or the buyer, to ensure that the funds are available for distribution at settlement.
So, a couple of things I'm going to dive in on from what you said. In Maryland, the buyer normally gets the choice of title agent.
Correct.
Do you have any idea why that may be?
Honestly, Nicole, I believe that it's the buyer's choice because of the laws that surround, this is probably more of an attorney question, but it allows that non-proprietary resolve as to, who do they represent. The settlement company represents the transaction, and I guess it's the buyer's monies.
Right. Okay, super. Sorry, put you on the spot with that one. But
Yeah.
so the other thing is, you talked about the alter statement, and I'd like to talk about this as a realtor as well, because for me, that is something that typically you should be receiving at least 3 days prior to the closing, which gives you an idea of all the breakdowns of the different costs. And those costs are typically in two columns, the one for the seller and the one for the buyer, and it goes through absolutely everything relating to the transaction. And Vicky, you can chime in on this too, but it'll show what were some of the title and closing costs. It'll show some of the taxes. It'll show any credits that may be given from, say, the seller to the buyer. Um, so it should be something which absolutely acts as an accounting sheet almost for you to see what is the final price, whether you are the buyer or the seller, in terms of what you would walk away from the closing table. Would that be a correct summary?
That's a very good summary. We actually have a online title calculator on our website, if it's okay, fredericktitle.com, and it's called Title Calculator, and anybody can access this. It's a free tool, and it allows you the ability to add things like HOA. What are my payments going to be if I have HOA? What kind of fees are going to be involved in this transaction? What are my state and county recording transfer fees going to cost me? And so some of those things are items we can identify prior to engaging in the purchase. But yes, definitely it's accounting. It is completely transparent. If there's water that's due at the end of settlement, that's going to be on there. Anything that might be outstanding, leaned against the property, would be reflected on that settlement statement for payoff.
Super. Thank you, Vicky. And I know that we actually pay some of the highest taxes in Frederick County and in Maryland, actually, when transacting on a property. So it's really important to be able to understand what that might look like in advance of a transaction. So I think that title calculator tool is really invaluable because a lot of people just don't realize what those taxes look like.
Right, especially if you're in the city. So you'll have two. You'll have the county, and then you'll have city. As in areas like Hagerstown, they're not reflected in the county fees. There's a separate city tax. So we need to make sure that they're captured. Frederick County, it's all included. But yeah.
Super. So, Vicky, have you ever seen a a closing go wrong? And are there any, typical things? Was there one particular thing that you've seen typically could upend a closing?
I have seen in my time a few transactions that perhaps there were fees that they weren't aware of. I'm not quite sure how that happens, but it happens. Something that they were uncomfortable about, maybe in a refi, that just didn't work for them come to that moment. Condo docs, we talked about that earlier today. If there were requirements like building restrictions, driveway covenants, deed restrictions. We're in an agricultural area. There are some people who would like to have ag on their property and can't. There are people who don't want ag on their property, and it is, which ag tax is something that people should be fully aware of if they're crossing into those areas, because it could be when we talk about fees, one of those fees that they just can't afford or don't want to afford if they're taking something from ag and putting it in residential, could be a very large expense. Surveys might result in something that they weren't aware of. Property lines. We always suggest that they're ordered at settlement. It's a very low cost fee, and sometimes people struggle with how do I get that later. So it's a good idea to get that in the initial transaction.
Yeah, Vicky and I, she alluded to how we had discussed earlier, just to give you an indication how things can go wrong at any point, right up to and including the actual closing itself when people are sitting around the table, pens in hand. I am just a week away from a closing on a particular property, which is a condo. And the buyer always has the right to read the condo documents. And in the condo documents, there was something that we discovered that led my client to say, nope, sorry, I'm not going to buy this particular condominium. And so, that's where it's tremendously important. All the procedures are followed, all the legal procedures during the closing period, which is from the ratification of contract through to sitting down and closing at the closing table. So, talking of that, who needs to be at a closing? Are the closings done in person, or can you do them without being physically present?
Those laws are changing as we currently speak with the COVID-19. We currently are accustomed to everybody coming to the party at the end of the day. Agents, lenders, buyers, sellers gathering around a table, and this has been the standard for, I guess, since the beginning of time. More so in our culture today, people don't have time, nor do they want to attend settlement. With the current pandemic that is occurring, we are encouraging only those that are required to sign documents to attend settlement, which would be buyer and seller. And we're actually keeping them separated in different rooms and have implemented some sanitization procedures to ensure that we are not cross-contaminating or providing exposure to anybody. So who needs to come to settlement? Currently, just the buyer and just the seller, and we do need to have wet signatures. There are emergency procedures being presented to enact documents to be signed electronically. It is not in law yet. Lenders have instituted e-closing, where a lot of their documents are going to be able to be signed electronically, with the exception of a very few that would require their wet signature. Again, those signings have to occur in front of an attorney or a licensed title producer. Notarization of those documents are also becoming quite forward processed, in that we have been working on the RON, Rotary Online Notaries, to sign them electronically. That is not in law yet, but is still at the forefront of being resolved. How do we do that? There's special softwares for that have to be used when it does become law. You can't just Skype, you can't just Facebook. You have to comply with certain regulations. It has to be done under certain supervisions, with documentation of that video actually being archived for many years, so that if there were ever any questions. In today's environment, we're asking people to take a picture of their license and forward it to us, so we're not touching each other's things with the COVID-19. But typically in prior history, we just take a picture of that copy and keep it in a file, and again is archived for several years for compliances. But yeah, so that is an ever-changing question at the very moment.
Wow, that's fascinating. And, it's kind of sad for me, because as a realtor, what I love is that moment of closing where, you've got a couple or an individual who's just bought their first home, or, they've just sold a home, and it's a real move on moment, and just being there after the whole process. So one of the things I know that you are also enabling is just for agents sometimes to be there through Facebook or some other, Skype or something. So at least we can be there, because if there are questions that come up, it's also good to have somebody who can answer, who knows something about the transaction. But us realtors, sadly, we're not allowed to be in the room, which, is good, because we're not transmitting, but it's quite an emotional process for everyone there.
It is. It's a very big change because it is a celebratory moment. And in the past, as I said, it's been one of those everybody comes to the party events. And unfortunately, that has changed currently, but hopefully we can go back to that again. And then, as you said, we have the electronic Skype, Facebook, where everybody is engaging, and that may become more of the norm.
Yeah. So let's talk about another area of the whole closing process, and that's wire fraud. This is something that has really come into the industry with quite a lot of force over the past few years. And I know certainly at Caris, we talk to our clients, we get them to sign something about wire fraud, and I'm constantly talking to my clients about do not share banking information over email, do not accept incoming wire information over email, always talk, always call an original number for a company, speak to an individual, and get verification of anything that you receive if you're going to be sending money there. Can you talk to a little bit about what you've seen with wire fraud in the industry?
Yes, absolutely. So wire fraud is a very real event, and it's basically unrecoverable. If funds are wired to someone who has fraudulently received them, it is highly unlikely they will be ever recovered. There are a few documented cases in the state of Maryland where this has happened. We actually caught one in our firm. It was a few years ago, and what happens is there's an email, and people using Gmail and other types of emails to that nature, as well as even our own fredericktitle.com, these people will take an email and change one little letter in there. And generally speaking, that is not caught. So it might be Nicole Leave at Caris, and they've added an S or an E somewhere in that communication. It looks exactly like, for those who are quickly looking. So what we ask is that people not accept an email communication. And from the very beginning, if you receive something that changes from the communication you originally received, again, our hello letters, they include the wire instructions. Generally, they're sent with a password. They're protected. Most people in the industry, most other title companies are doing the same. We have very big wire alert notices. Do not accept a call from someone. You place the call to the title company that you are dealing with if you receive anything that asks you to change the method in which you were advised to send your funds. At no time should you automatically send them to anybody. I tell people this in regard to their notes as well. When you're signing a note, do not send your money to someone just because a letter says you need to send your mortgage payment here now. Check with your lending institution. Make sure that they actually sent that to you.
And there's something further on that, because I've also heard of instances, because the sale of your property is recorded online at the courthouse, and that is publicly accessible. After the completion of a sale, the new buyers often receive information or a request for payment on something for a filing fee for the new property, a filing fee that was not paid at the time of closing, or something relating to their new status as the homeowner. And it sounds very official and it sounds very credible, but the reality is all your fees are paid at the closing. And if anything, there's money that comes back to you, but there shouldn't be further money that you're sending after a closing. And so what's happening is, somebody will send you a letter saying, oh, congratulations on the closing of your property. However, the property now needs to be filed and recorded, and there is an $80 fee. Well, they're just cashing in on that $80 fee. And it's the same with, getting a letter that is presumably from the lender that you have used, because that information can also be found. And they're saying something about whether your mortgage payment should now be routed to this different area. Never trust something like that. Speak to all the original players in your original transaction, because you do not want to end up losing your money.
Correct. Same as I've heard recently, there's a mail spam going around telling people that they need to send them money to get a copy of their deed to make sure that it's correct. That's public information. You can see it any day, anytime online. And do not send money to anybody if you're receiving a letter through the mail in that manner.
Super. Well, Vicki, this has been tremendous and really informative, and I just want to thank you so much for your time. Can you share your contact information?
Thank you. Yes, you can reach me at Vicki French, VICKI-FRENCH, at fredericktitle.com, FREDERICKTITLE.com. And our phone number, 301-694-7235, is the office line. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nicole, for having me. I believe we have a lot more information we could share with everybody, maybe on another call sometime.
Thank you, Vicki. And if anyone wants to contact me, call me at 301-305-5169. Nicole Souls Frederick. I'm part of Caris Realty. Have a great day and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Be well. Bye-bye.